This is the second story behind the beef I'm doing out of 5, and this time we'll be looking at Drake versus Rick Ross. These guys have known each other for over 15 years at this point and were really close at various times, only to end up as they are now, distant enemies. Just like in my Drake and Kendrick video, I'll also warn anyone who's sensitive right now, I am a Drake fan. I know, brave. With that being said, I don't hate Rick Ross, so if I come across as biased, I'm sorry. But I'm just sharing my opinion and you're welcome to your own. This is all just a bit of fun, mixing some facts with my thoughts as we try to piece together why Rick Ross hates Drake and why Drake hates Rick Ross. So with all that bullshit out the way, let's break down the beef. Drake and Rick Ross have been one of the best collaborative duos in hip-hop, almost never missing and having a wide catalogue together. But it all started for them back in 2009 as they both featured on DJ Khaled's Fed Up. And their relationship just grew from there, with Drake featuring on Rick Ross's 2010 album Teflon Don and the classic that is Aston Martin Music, but also his mixtape Ashes to Ashes just months later on the song Made Men. Very early on, Drake viewed Ross as a mentor and big brother in the industry, while Ross was able to capitalize on the rising sound of Drake and his melodies. And after their collaboration on Amon One and Ross's appearance at OVO Fest in 2011, Drake teased a joint album that was in the works with Rick Ross called YOLO. It was a project that never materialized and was a product of the times, but shows just how close these two guys were and how natural making music together was for them, with Drake even admitting at the time that he loves making music with Ross. Ross spoke about this YOLO album in 2020, giving us some insight into their relationship at the time. He notes that during 2011 and 2012, Drake was spending a lot of time in Miami and treated Ross's home like his own, coming over almost every day just to hang out. They bonded over their shared rich and luxurious sound and continued collaborating for years, making hits and having success through songs like Free Spirit, Lord Knows, Pop That, Diced Pineapples, and Stay Scheming. But their collabs came to a halt in 2015 when Drake started beefing with Maybach Music member Meek Mill, who was signed to Rick Ross. This feud separated the two, while they later clarified that things always remained amicable between them. But one of the toughest things for Drake during that time was losing his friendship with Ross. Ross laid low for most of the feud, but has always held firm in his beliefs of writing for his friends and showing loyalty. And on Color Money, which released on September 4, 2015, Ross reused some of the bars from Drake's back-to-back, flipping them positively and generally makes the point that he and his Miami and MMG people are down to kill for their people, like Meek Mill, showing where he stood and where his loyalties lied. Some people think that Drake responded and took a jab back on Western Road Flows from his Views album, as Ross also took a shot at one of Drake's mentors, Birdman, and threatened his people. This could make sense, but Drake brags about flying out Rick Ross's ex, Lyric Galore, to St. Martin, and this raises a common theme we'll see in a number of Drake's failed relationships and professional backstabs. Drake has a penchant for messing with ex-girlfriends, wifeys, and even other girls who have been involved with these other rappers and artists in one way or another. Drake's 2016 mention of Lyric Galore is just one mention of a longer list of examples than I thought existed, and we'll get to all the girls who are known as they pop up in other stories. But months later, Ross appeared on Drink Champs, essentially reiterating his point from Color Money that he'll do whatever needs doing when push comes to shove if his friends and family keep being attacked or challenged. He also defends Meek Mill, saying that he didn't lose. Ross is one of the most materialistic guys in the game and ties winning and losing to money, insisting that Meek's bank account doesn't look like someone who lost. And in another podcast 9 months later, Ross credits Rap-A-Lot CEO Jay Prince with orchestrating a meeting between Ross and Drake to squash their beef and reunite. Jay Prince is a hugely influential figure in Drake's life, with his son, Jazz Prince, being a huge part of Drake's relationship with Lil Wayne and getting him signed. But Jay Prince was a mentor and a father figure to Drake, and someone he respected immensely, playing a big role in mediating strained relationships over the next few years. But as for this meeting with Drake, Ross said that it was best for business to let bygones be bygones. His view of their relationship at this point is interesting because it doesn't suggest that they're actually friends or close, but that they have a lucrative musical partnership that they can benefit from as allies. Now, this is something that Drake brings up in his diss tracks later on, but you could view Ross as someone leeching off the name and status that having a song with Drake brings, needing his cosign to have commercial success. I love Ross and I don't want to suggest it for sure, you can come up with your own takeaways on it, but you could see their partnership being more beneficial to one of them than the other. Ross is driven by his pursuit of money and says that their meeting was not even really them having a difficult conversation, but one tailored around wanting to make money and reaching 9 figures. But he did want to have a sit down and reach an understanding. But we didn't get another feature until 2019, when the Raptors won a championship, resulting in the Best in the World 2-pack and the song Money in the Grave. It's a pretty clear return to form that shows that despite their years apart, they have a clear sound and their musical dynamic is as easy as it comes. And Drake returned the favour by featuring on Ross's Gold Roses, which served as his lead single for Port of Miami 2, despite Drake not being in the music video. The Rap Radar interview from 2019 gave us a lot of insights into Drake's relationships with various people, and he spoke positively about his bond with Ross. He shares the same sentiments that he's had since 2010, saying that Rick Ross is one of his favourite artists and one of his favourite people to work with. I might be psychoanalyzing one of his comments too much, but Drake describes their texts as either Ross reaching out to Drake for a song or Drake offering a song to Ross. This is obviously in reference to their working relationship, while it's not clear how close they are outside of it. It suggests that Drake views himself as the one who's always giving Ross a helping hand. But he says it genuinely and continues praising their relationship and saying that he enjoys getting a text from Ross to work on music because they're always on the same page and have a consistent relationship that Ross backs up. He also suggests that Gold Roses was originally his song that he gave to Ross. This is where Drake reveals that one of the most painful things about the Meek Mill beef was losing his relationship with Ross, someone he calls his OG, a mentor, and one of his favourite people in the game. It's all high praise from Drake, who seemed to genuinely hate that Ross had to pick a side, calling that the worst part about rap beefs. Rick Ross spoke to Complex in 2020 where he expressed both his fondness for Drake and the YOLO joint album. He says that collaborating with Drake is the best of the best, and loves how varied their work can be from Aston Martin music to Gold Roses. And Ross really respects Drake's versatility, hearing him switch from bars to being a descendant of Keith Sweat, saying that he enjoys both. And that's what makes Drake unique and have his own lane. These comments show a deep appreciation from Ross for Drake, and how much he appreciates working with him creatively and musically. And lucky for us, collaborations kept coming with the next one in 2021 on the Scary Hours 2 EP with Lemon Pepper Freestyle, which itself, through its title, is an homage to Ross's Wingstop ownership. And just a month after this, Ross said that their YOLO album was under serious consideration. And months later on Certified Lover Boy, after showing respect for Lil Wayne on Lemon Pepper Freestyle, brings the three of them together for You Only Live Twice, which, given the recent talk of the YOLO album, is likely a reference to that all these years later, while they ultimately decided against doing it. All this goes to show how good of a spot their relationship seemed to be at this time. Drake basically dedicated the title of two of his songs to Rick Ross, and their reunion had them back in their prime. Fast forward to May 2023, Ross returned to Drink Champs and spoke about Drake, giving us an update that they're real close. He also gives Drake high praise, placing him alongside himself in the top 2% of creators in the world that can walk in a room, hear something that you love, and actually create it, write it, and execute it. He says that this isn't normal and isn't something he's done with or seen in other artists. There's a lot of mutual respect between the two as artists and musical powerhouses who have a talent for bringing a song to life. And in January 2024, Ross went on Aiden Ross's stream where he said that Stay Scheming was his favourite collaboration with Drake. He recalls Drake's work ethic that mirrors what he said in that Drink Champs interview, saying that he didn't wait a second after hearing the beat, marking another natural and effortless collaboration that Ross calls magical. This is interesting because that continued praise would suggest that they're on good terms by this point, but something had been brewing in the background around this time. So was Ross playing for the camera, or did this thing not bother him as much as he wanted us to believe? Drake has also had a storied relationship with French Montana, another MMG artist signed to Rick Ross, and a mutual friend by all accounts. But Drake sent a cease and desist to French Montana to prevent a song from releasing on his Mac and Cheese 5 album, with Drake's featuring verse. The song was called Splash Brothers, which was also leaked in January on Reddit. There was also another rumoured song called Big Pun that was supposed to feature Drake, meant for the same album, that was partially leaked in May 2023 and then fully leaked in December, while both of those songs didn't have Drake's feature on them by the time the album released in February. But let's talk about the cease and desist. Splash Brothers, when leaked on Reddit, had cover art of superimposed heads covering the faces of the Warriors' Big Three, with Drake as Steph Curry, Montana as Klay Thompson, and Ross as Draymond Green. I'm not sure if the cover was fan-made, but it fits with the title and presents them interestingly, with Drake being the superstar. From a label point of view, losing out on a Drake feature, potentially two, is devastating, as those extra streams would have been huge for the commercial success of that album. But also from a personal perspective, with Ross featuring on that song as well, that was another opportunity for Ross to gain a charting song himself, with somebody who lives there. So why did Drake send this cease and desist? There's no evidence that his relationship with French Montana had soured, and French Montana had never spoken a bad word about Drake, even amid the ensuing beef. But it's likely that the reason Drake didn't want to be featured on the song is because the track was produced by Metro Boomin. In the following months, Larry Jackson, CEO of Gamma, and therefore the boss of MMG among other labels, admitted that the cease and desist was real, and that he thought that it was funny, but everyone has different senses of humour. I don't know what the cryptic fuck type of answer that was meant to be, but he suggests that he doesn't think that Drake or his team was trying to be nefarious by issuing it, and instead thought it was meant as a joke. But listening to his verse in the song, the very first line is a reason why many people think so many other artists and rappers don't like him, like Ross. Women are often an obstacle in Drake's life between healthy relationships with other artists. Even if they're just sexual or one-time things, other artists take offense to it, and rightly so. Some people question if Drake does this intentionally or accidentally because Ludacris hurt him earlier in his career by taking his girl, so now he projects that pain on other artists. It's a reach. I think Drake just has a problem. So I mentioned Lyric Galore, but there's another girl that's brought into question after Ross features on Future and Metro's joint album, We Don't Trust You. A couple days after this was released, Drake gave Ross's ex-girlfriend Christina Mackey a special guest invitation courtesy of OVO to his show in Ross's city, Miami. The Petty King strikes again. Mackey had confirmed that she and Ross broke up earlier in March, so just weeks later, Drake was doing this. And more so, this petty move reportedly happened after Ross unfollowed Drake just hours after We Don't Trust You came out. It's fair to assume that the industry, or at least specifically the MMG guys, knew about Drake's issue with Metro, so Ross featuring on his project was a sign of him picking his side. And he doubles down here by posting an Instagram story a week later, driving around vibing to Like That. Now I think it's possible that Drake jumped the gun, seeing Rick feature in the album, and Drake immediately reached out to his ex to hurt him. That got back to Ross, and so he unfollowed Drake. It's worth noting that the song Ross featured on, Everyday Hustle, doesn't contain any jabs or subliminals that could really be tied to Drake. Instead, Drake seemed to view the album and everybody that featured on it as snakes and enemies. Although not everybody, with Travis Scott and Playboi Carti not being hit in the shootout of push-ups, making Ross a special case, hinting that more was happening behind the scenes at the time or had been brewing in the shadows. Let's get into the disses that might reveal a little more about how these guys viewed each other personally before I give my 2 cents. So, Push-Ups leaked a week earlier than it actually dropped, which is what Ross wrote his response diss track to, allowing him to respond as quickly as he did, although to outdated lyrics at times. Drake makes 3 points at Ross. One about taking someone's latest girl, likely not Ross's as it doesn't make sense in that line, but it fits with Drake's repeated actions, pushes the pressure point of Ross's recent split with Mackey, all while hinting at and mocking his law enforcement past. He also shows some shock at seeing Ross get involved and jumping in, something so petty given his older age. But more importantly, Drake touches on Ross's career and their past collaborations, noting that every commercial hit Ross has ever got came from Drake in one way or another. Finally, Drake dismisses him from the beef, telling him to stay out of his business and use that check, which could be a reference to the residuals he still receives from the hits Drake helped him get, insisting that he should be grateful. But now, Drake is saying that's the end of that. No more collaborations, no more handouts. One of the first things Ross brings up is Drake's ghostwriting allegations from 2015 that were originally brought into question by Ross's close friend, Meek Mill. Revisiting this old beef and something Ross separated himself from in some ways reveals that maybe he did feel a way about it or does now. Ross calls into question Drake's lyrical authenticity, suggesting that his themes and bars don't match his lifestyle and reality. But he also attacks his copy and paste flow and argues that he owes Lil Wayne and Jay Prince everything for making his career. He samples a clip of Drake admitting that Ross is his favorite person to rap with that particular clip coming from his 2023 It's All a Blur tour. This isn't anything new and something Drake has admitted multiple times. In fact, this is something that Kanye tried doing with Drake too, recalling Drake being a fan of his and taking credit for making him. And Ross does this too in a way by missing Drake's happy to be here days when he was a smaller artist who had less of an ego and was grateful to be around someone like Ross. But now he's the bigger artist that others run to stay relevant. This is also where Ross brings up the French Montana cease and desist situation that Ross views as Drake hating on his friend's project. This could be true for sure. Drake might not want to feature on Montana's work anymore. Perhaps the verse was old. We don't know for certain, but the Metro point to me still seems most likely. The other points Ross makes are more of the defamatory allegations that we saw in a bunch of these diss tracks. Ross calls Drake's race into question and accuses him of getting ab surgery, a nose job, and even believes that he got a BBL. Where I don't respect this is that if Ross felt this way, why didn't he distance himself from Drake when he thought those things happened, or when Drake changed? Instead, he seemed more than happy to ask for a feature. So this is where the music industry reveals itself as a battling ground for egomaniacs who want more fame and more money, no matter the cost. They'll fake a friendship for a decade if it benefits them. In the second round of diss tracks, Drake had more to say to Ross. The opening lines about DPs and PCs could relate to Kendrick, but also tie into Ross's law enforcement background, which is something Drake loved poking fun at in his shots. DP stands for disciplinary punishment within gangs for members who break rules. Drake suggests that Ross is merely a civilian who would need PC or protective custody if they were exposed to real danger. Overall, question questioning Ross's true street authenticity. This is something that the game attacked further, calling into question his stolen drug lord persona on his diss track Freeway's Revenge, released a week later that Ross never responded to. It's interesting that Ross contends that if he gets challenged, he responds, because that's what a boss does. But only when it's Drake, because that attention is too good to turn down. Drake essentially calls him fat and jealous among other things, but more interestingly, money is a big part of his jabs at Ross, as that's always been a big part of their relationship. Drake repeatedly makes the point that he has more of it than him, despite viewing him as his big homie and OG when he was coming up, and that makes him envious. Ultimately, Drake thinks that Ross must have snorted up the drugs he supposedly pushes to say the things he said on Champagne Moments, dismissing a lot of it. Ross didn't send any fire back with any more diss tracks after Family Matters, but he did do a show in July in Vancouver that went bad. Drake references this in What Did I Miss a year later. Ross played Not Like Us during his performance, and as he was being escorted backstage, a brawl erupted with footage coming out that cuts just as it appears that Ross gets punched in his left eye. The man who punched Ross goes by the name Icarus and is reportedly affiliated with the biker gang Hell's Angels, which is indirectly connected to Drake. Allegedly. And just talking about What Did I Miss while we're here, the final verse works for all the people that Drake could possibly mention in a song about betrayal and not seeing it. He's lent his pen and given verses and features to a ton of people and again helped them reach peaks in their career. He's taken people on tour with him, had them come out at OVO Fest, and overall got them business performing, filling their pockets. Generally, he paints himself as a real friend and collaborator who has always looked out for his friends in the industry, making sure they got what they deserved. Ross would next address the beef on Nightcap, telling Shannon Sharp in August that not responding is a response when you're a boss. Ross claims that he entered the beef because he was named and wanted to have fun, but again, given his lack of reply to the game, the spectacle of the Drake beef was too enticing and too profitable to turn down. It seemed like he dodged a fight that he doesn't have an upside in, showing his true motives. Kanye had put out the idea that the whole "we don't trust you" run and the ensuing beefs was planned as the elimination of Drake. Ross disputes that, saying that on some rap shit, there were no conspiracies. It was simply a case of being named that got him involved and that he wanted to have fun, and he did in the end. But a few days before the interview, No Face was released by Drake. Unlike the Kendrick beef, Drake felt stabbed in the back by some of the people in the industry that he thought he was friends with. Ross was one of them. So in some of his more recent tracks that discuss betrayal, Ross is often implied or dissed. Drake hints at the well-documented phenomenon of the Drake stimulus package, where a Drake feature can skyrocket an artist's career or give them a career peak. Rick Ross is just one of the artists who can be associated with this. Drake questions how these artists could harbor hate for him when he helped propel some of their careers, but also gave them their greatest commercial success and a wider audience. A few weeks later, Ross went on Young Miami's podcast and was asked about a few things Drake related. Ross says that the beef started by being named on push-ups, suggesting that Drake started it, while Drake viewed Ross's involvement and support of Like That and We Don't Trust You as him joining their side. Meaning this could have been a classic case of miscommunication that has ruined their relationship forever. But I think there's more going on here. Perhaps some things behind the scenes. But even if that's the case, it ultimately revealed how these people, like Ross, feel about him in secret. But Ross isn't closing the door on another reunion and making amends. Shocker. But Ross paints himself as a boss and that it depends on how he's feeling at the time, but also that he's not losing any sleep over it. Ross reflects back on their successful history and says that some people take shit for granted. He implies that Drake threw away their relationship and reiterates his stance on loyalty, standing by those who are loyal to him. Other people come and go. Interestingly though, Ross, while questioning Drake's street credibility, suggests that things could have been fixed with a phone call much earlier and that things didn't have to go the way they went. Ross sees his inclusion on push-ups as a case of miscommunication, thinking that Drake jumped the gun when he saw his involvement on Future and Metro's album, which he obviously responded to quickly by inviting Ross's ex out to his show. This is where we have to dissect things, because somebody is lying. I think Drake inviting Mackie out to his Miami show was a move made to hurt Ross after the fact. It was a show in Ross's city with his freshly split ex, and as far as we know, nothing happened. It was more so the implication and disrespect of doing so that was meant to enrage Ross. But we also know that Ross unfollowed Drake hours after We Don't Trust You came out, so either Ross jumped on board and said fuck Drake after it released, co-signing the beginning of that movement, or Drake started plotting immediately after it released and looked at how he could hurt the people involved. He saw Ross, was hurt, and then reached out to Mackie to get her at the show, which would have come back to Ross and resulted in the unfollowing. As minor of a thing it is, the unfollowing really is key to understanding when their beef started and was definitely before push-ups, despite what Ross claims. But you can come up with your own conclusions on what sounds more likely. I'll also say, I don't think the French Montana cease and desist was that big of a deal to Ross, but maybe added to something that was brewing or in hindsight. What is true, as Ross says here, is that a lot of the problems in the industry come from a misunderstanding or a lack of communication as these artists refuse to put aside their ego and their pride.